Hello everyone, welcome to SmurfyDan Interviews. It had been a while since I interviewed our Thomas fan on the internet, and now for something completely different. For this special occasion, I'm delighted to introduce you to a TV producer who had known Reverend Wilbert Awdry very well throughout his final years in Stroud, and made a bookmark documentary about the author and his really useful engines. So I would like you all to meet Nicholas Jones. Would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers, Nicholas?
Right. I'm just another documentary maker, but I've got a particular interest in biography. I love the stories of people who've done interesting things. And really, quite by chance, I got the opportunity to film Wilbert Awdry back in the 1990s when he was still alive and in quite good health still, and make this documentary for the BBC. So I would describe myself as a documentary maker with a particular interest in people, but also a lifelong interest in railway trains, going back to when I was a child many years ago.
Right, so that is some interesting introduction from you, Nicholas. Now, shall we
Thank you.
start with the questions? Let's start with your Kickstarter project as a special way to promotion on it. The first question is, what is Kickstarter project all about?
Right. I was fortunate enough to be able to keep the film rolls when I made the documentary about Wilbert Awdry. Normally, as a producer, one does get to keep them, and invariably they get a bit old with time. But also, they were shot on 16mm film at a time when we used to transfer them to videotape. Now, they'd look very good, but the way technology has evolved, we can now transfer them to high definition in 2K or even slightly more. And the purpose of my crowdfund is to invite people to help me raise the cash to remaster the interviews, starting with that of Wilbert himself, onto high definition, and thereby bring out the grain of the film to a much higher quality than has ever been seen before. In the process, we'll be able to return to the original materials and make a Blu-ray copy of the original documentary, The Thomas the Tank Engine Man. And I can, as we've got all the capacity of a Blu-ray, I can put bonus features on it. And that will be a mixture of what couldn't go in the film and stuff which I will now shoot specially to support the story.
I find
Well,
it
we reached the
interesting because
first target in 26 hours, as a matter of fact. So
yeah,
I was most grateful to the fandom for their support. I have to confess, Daniel, I was a little bit nervous when we started because I've never done this before. And Kickstarter, you can only go once. It's not a question of you only live twice. You can only live once. And I thought long and hard, dare I press launch? In the end, I thought, just do it. I pressed launch, and in no time, we were getting responses. So it's great. It's worked. I'm very pleased.
that's totally understandable on how we were able to be nervous at first before actually launching something very ambitious and big, like your 2K Blu-ray remastering of your documentary, which I feel that has some tremendous success. Even I do have a feeling that it should be a successful thing, and it did, eventually did, much to our surprise.
I've been distributing DVDs, making DVDs and distributing them and selling them for a long, long time. And I know how to do it, but always it's a leap into the unknown. And when you're funding it yourself, whether via one's own money or via a crowdfund, there's always an element of risk. But as a filmmaker, you just have to take risk.
Speaking of DVDs, we got one question from a YouTuber who happens to be named Thomas Van 18, who asked, will the Thomas the Tank Engine Man be released on DVD?
Yeah, if you can make a Blu-ray, one can easily make a DVD as well. So I'm going to make both. Don't worry about that. I'm well
Uh,
aware that not everybody bought a Blu-ray machine. A Blu-ray machine will play a DVD, but a DVD machine will not necessarily play a Blu-ray, although the latest ones apparently will. Also, I know that some people will simply want the film as a collector's item. They may never even open the packet. But you have to be flexible, and with my other films, my aviation documentaries, I offer them both as DVDs and as Vimeo downloads. With this, I thought, yes, let's offer both a Blu-ray and a DVD.
Yeah, that's a very good alternative for some fans to switch to DVDs if some, especially if some don't have a Blu-ray player yet and such, or hadn't moved to HD yet still.
Oh yes, no, I want as many people to see it as possible. It'll still look very, very good on DVD.
And so we were talking of your first stretch goal. Would you care to describe what it's going to be about?
Well, obviously we want to be able to preserve the interview with Wilbert, which is 100 minutes long, plus another 20 minutes of material shot in Sodor, his house. We want to have it preserved and enhanced, in other words, in a higher quality, so that in 100 years' time, people can still look at it. Now, if we just hung on to the original film, I doubt it would last that long. So one is remastering and preserving. But second, the goal is to then move on to the other film material that we shot. We filmed his son, we filmed his daughter Hilary, and of course we filmed so many other people connected to the story. So it's really to build up a high quality collection of remastered materials in uncut form, so they're always there for the future, and in the process make a Blu-ray which enables fans and others to see the film in much better quality than has ever been available. But it's being handed to them as a reward in return for financing me to do the restoration.
Lovely, lovely stuff, I would say. Are there any alternative if there are some fans that wanted to get their copy but couldn't know how Kickstarter works?
Yes, several people have said to me they can't use Kickstarter. I simply give them my PayPal address and they can send me the money to acquire the Blu-ray that way. I've done that on 3 or 4 occasions now. If you wish to do so, yes, it's my email, nicholas.jones@quantafilms.com. That's my PayPal address. That's Nicholas with an H. I mean, I deal with PayPal all the time with people all around the world for my other films and for this. No trouble at all.
There you have it, folks. And as well as those that are new to donating to your projects, but have been donating on Kickstarters before. So if any of you guys had yet to donate to Nicholas's Kickstarter project on remastering the TtTTE Man documentary, then the link is in the description below.
That's the easiest way to do it.
Can you tell us what did you do during your childhood years prior to becoming a filmmaker?
One of my earliest memories is of having a little postcard of an engine behind the bricks in a tunnel, and it was, of course, Henry. Now, I've never forgotten that. There's actually a photograph of me aged about 4, young and pretty with blonde hair, holding this postcard. I also had in my hand a little blue toy engine, which looks like a kind of, not a Coronation Scott, I think a Princess Elizabeth class, one of the LMS engines. So when I was a child, these steam engines did still exist. They were rapidly disappearing, but they were still there. And you were aware of them. I mean, you didn't see them very often. You had to live right next to the railway. But my earliest memories are of reading the 3 railway engines, and also reading, is it 4 Little Engines, book number 8, with Sir Handel and Rheneas?
Technically, 4 Little Engines is book number 10, but you're pretty close.
Book number 10, okay. I know it was written before I was born, but my mother bought me that one, and I do have very strong memories of it. And in 1994, when I was researching the idea, I went to the library to find some books by Wilbert. These are the original Railway Series books. And I found 4 Little Engines, and it was extraordinary, Daniel. When I was turning the page, I knew exactly which picture would be on the next page. The one, for example, I think of Scarloey with the look of pain on his face because he has a broken spring, and the refreshment lady and things like that, and the water being poured into the tank. You just never, ever forget the images of Reginald Dorby, I think, certainly for my era, when they were the main pictures. Peter Edwards and the others came later. But I do remember as a child going to watch trains in the later 1960s. You very, very rarely saw a steam train by then, but you did see some wonderful diesel hydraulics, things like that. And they used to make a fantastic rushing noise as they went through the station.
Right, that must be very interesting insights into your childhood years. That includes your early years of Thomas and Friends, including your what happens to be your favorite book.
Yes. I don't know whatever happened to the books. Sadly, I have lost them. When I filmed Wilbert, I did actually get him to sign some of the books, but I gave them away to people and I never saw them again.
Oh, that's a shame. Never mind.
It is.
Yeah, those must be some very everlasting treasures that you could have.
But what, I mean, okay, I've lost the books, but I did meet Wilbert. What more could I ask for?
At least you're able to meet Wilbert in the end.
I met him several times.
Yeah,
but,
not just for your documentary, of course. Yeah.
no, we had to meet him a few times beforehand, and
Right.
I got on well with him. I think he respected the fact that I liked his books. Not everybody he met had any great interest in them, but he could tell very quickly that I had a genuine interest in the old railway engines, the railway trains, and that I did actually know what his books were about. And he and I got on well.
Now, let's move into the next question. From Lewis Gilbert, also known as Lewis G97 on Instagram, who asked, are there any particular people in the film and TV industry who inspired you?
Well, this is going to sound an amazing coincidence, but I became very friendly with a film director who died only a couple of years ago, and his name was Lewis Gilbert. He directed 3 James Bond films and many other documentaries, lots of movies. He directed my favourite Bond film, We Only Live Twice.
What?
And I don't know if you're aware of Lewis, but this is the very same name, Lewis Gilbert, Lewis. I was living in, well, not far from where I am now, in Kensington in London, and I discovered that a friend of mine used to work on Lewis's garden in London, and he introduced me to Lewis. Now, to meet a Bond director was fantastic. And he told me so much about how to make films, Lewis did. He said that really films are about 2 people, and that also you want to know what happens next. If you stick to those 2 rules, you've got a good film. When my daughter was born, one of the first people I took her to see was Lewis Gilbert. And he lived in Kensington. He was an amazing man. He came from a very poor background, and he admitted he was quite lucky. He managed to get into work as an extra. He became a child actor, and before the war, he was working as a 3rd assistant director for Alfred Hitchcock, no less. And he acted with Laurence Olivier. He then joined the Royal Air Force in the war, but he was injured, so he was attached to the US Army Air Force film unit, and he worked with Clark Gable, and he had the most amazing career. And yet, at heart, he remained an East Londoner, but he directed You Only Live Twice, Moonraker, and The Spy Who Loved Me. And I was helping him write his memoirs at one point, writing about working with Sean Connery.
Wow, 2 Lewis Gilberts. One of them's a director. Now there's something that Mel and Brandon got to hear.
Well, I did tell Brandon the other day. In fact, if you go online and go to the year 2000, the Guardian newspaper, and look up a story that says Nicholas Jones, Lewis Gilbert, March 2000, of human bondage, you will find my article there. But I learned a great deal from Lewis. I mean, I've just picked up other stuff from working with people, but in many ways I'm self-taught. But meeting Lewis, I got the impression that I was doing it right.
Well,
and if you've directed 3 Bond films, Alfie, Shirley Valentine, Educating Rita, Sink the Bismarck, you name it, if he says your work is good, then it can't be bad.
Before the establishment of Quanta Films, where did you study film? A question submitted to me by Jimmy Parker on Facebook.
I never did study film. I'm still trying to study film. After I left university, eventually I went on a radio journalism course, and I went to work at BBC Radio 4. This was in the 1980s. And to work at the BBC then, and maybe now, was quite a hard job to get. And it wasn't a very nice place in some respects, but in other places, in other ways, it was a wonderful place to work. But really, my background is in journalism and storytelling. I came to picture telling later, But I was always interested in transport. When I worked at Radio 4, I worked on a program called Going Places, which was about cars, trains, boats, aircraft. I also worked on its sister program called Breakaway, which was a holiday program. Now, of course, you go on holiday by car, boat, train, or ship, or whatever. So transport was always part of my journalistic background. But how did I learn filmmaking? I was always a very keen photographer, and I just taught myself photography, how to frame a picture, how to get the light, how to get nice soft backgrounds, contrast. And one of the things I was very keen to make photographs of, we're talking about 40 years ago, was the last of the old diesel locomotives on British railways with the old signals, things like that. So I guess I learned directing by taking still photographs.
Wow, lovely insights into your the filmmaking career. Even if you didn't actually study film, but still, wow.
Very few people did study film in the 1980s. It's only in recent years there's been an explosion of film courses.
Well, that's fair enough. That is totally fair. Yeah. Now, speaking of Quanta Films, how did Quanta Films came to be after its establishment?
Oh, my father set it up, as a matter of fact. I was working at the BBC at the time, but he himself had been a producer, my father. There used to be a long-running science show on television called Tomorrow's World, and I don't know if you remember it. My father created that. My mother, who's still alive, she's 93 this month, albeit in very poor health, she invented the name with my father. My father died a long time ago, but my father had been a producer, so he went back in. He left the BBC at about 73, and we had nothing to do with TV for a long time. Quite independently, I got to work in the industry myself without his help. But he set up the company in 82, and really it was just felt I should join it in about 1983.
So it's more or less like a family business in filmmaking, is it?
It is. It now belongs to me and my daughter.
Oh, wow. That is lovely stuff. Talking about a new generation of filmmaking.
Well, my daughter has written her first novel on her mobile telephone, and I read it and I said, it's very good. We must somehow turn this into a low-budget movie.
Ooh, good luck on that one.
Yes, well, it's not easy, but I think there's some sort of hereditary writing skill in my family. That's really what it comes down to.
That's fair, yeah. But still, I wish you both a good luck on this one.
And we also love taking photographs in my family. Well, we're not the only family that loves taking photographs, but we're obsessive about it.
Mm-hmm. So I can see that from your pictorial storytellings on Twitter on your Thomas documentary as of late, which is lovely too. Now, let's move to the next question here.
Yeah.
Do you have a personal favorite documentary, especially from Quanta Films?
Obviously, the Thomas the Tank Engine Man, but also I'm actually rather proud of a film I made about Sir Frank Whittle, who invented the jet engine. I'm meeting his son on Monday. I work very closely with the Whittle family. Frank Whittle was an amazing man who shrank the world by reinventing aviation. And I made two documentaries after I did the Thomas the Tank Engine Man. I did the first of my three films about Frank Whittle. And I knew Frank Whittle, I filmed him. And amazingly, the night in 1997, when my first Whittle documentary went out on BBC, Wilbert Awdry died. And I was very saddened to learn that. This was in March the 20th, 1997.
Yeah,
and the next day, I rang up the BBC and I said, look, I'm afraid Wilbert has died. And they said, we must repeat the show. So I think in April, they repeated the Thomas the Tank Engine Man in 1997.
Wow.
I remember it was pick of the day in the Daily Mail.
Talking about courtesy from the BBC.
Quite extraordinary, isn't it? Can't explain it.
Yeah. And is there any availability for Sir Frank Whittle documentary?
I remade the film as Whittle the Jet Pioneer, and I've been selling it on DVD or as a Vimeo download on my website for quite a long time. I've got about 400 copies of the DVD left, and when they're gone, that's it.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, my aviation films are actually what's available for sale on the website.
Right.
They're lovely films. Inventing the jet engine is quite a difficult job. And being a brilliant child author is also a difficult job. I just love stories about people who've done amazing things.
Right. The next set of questions will now be shifting towards the main subject, the Tank Engine Man. Are we ready, Nicholas?
Yep, far away.
Right. The first question is, were you familiar with Thomas the Tank Engine before making the documentary?
I'll say one thing, Daniel. When I was a child, and we're talking a long time ago, there wasn't the same obsession about Thomas. Edward, James, Henry, Gordon had equal status. Thomas was this cheeky little engine, and obviously he turned up in the books, but I honestly don't remember Thomas all that much. I remember Skarloey just as well, or Rheneas. I remember Sir Handel. I remember Gordon. I remember Henry being stuck in the hill, in the tunnel rather. And I remember it was Edward who pushed Henry up the hill. No, Gordon up the hill, wasn't it? Yet people think it was Thomas. It wasn't.
Nope. As far as we know, it's Edward. So you had some...
Can I say one thing? I did have a toy. I had a Hornby 00 train set. I still got it, actually. Very, very old. I had a Southern Railway or SCCR, I think, Ginty tank engine in green. I always thought Thomas was based on that engine.
Oh, not exactly.
Even as a child. And I think he is based on a Ginty, isn't he?
Well, it's pretty close. Thomas is actually based on the E2 class London, Brighton and South Coast tank engine.
It's something from the Southern Railway, I know that.
Yeah, the South Coast.
But
Right.
I have to say that tank engines, when I was a child, were considered a little bit ordinary. It was the express engines. I had a Hornby 00 train of Denby Castle, 7023, I think its number was, or 7032, and Castles were fantastic engines.
There must be a fascinating set of engines.
I did see them, but I've got no memory of it.
Wow. And as for your early memories of Thomas, or should I say Edward, Skarloey, Rheneas, and
That's right. I remember those ones far better than Thomas. I can't explain why, but I do.
So there you have it, die-hard Railway Series fans. There you have it. But I digress. Anything that comes from a Railway Series is all good, even if it's not Thomas. It didn't have.
It doesn't have to be Thomas.
Nope.
I once, I did actually ask Wilbert. I said, "Do you have a favourite engine?" He said, "Oh, it's like, well, did you have a favourite child?" But I have a sneaking suspicion that he preferred Percy to Thomas. I don't know why. I just think that.
Oh, well, I wouldn't be so sure if he actually had a favorite character. Although,
Well, he always denied it. But remember, in the book, Percy on the other side of the track, where you have Wilbert and his children on the platform. Do you remember that picture?
oh, troublesome engines, you mean?
Which Reginald Dolby drew.
But in the story, Percy runs away.
I remember talking to Reginald's daughter, Kate Holland, about it.
Yeah, that's the one. There's an illustration of Percy with what's surprisingly to be the Awdry family on the station platform.
That's right. I always thought saddle tanks looked rather nice.
Lovely, yes. I like Percy, especially for a saddle tank.
Everybody likes Percy.
He's very young and he's very adventurous, and he can be cheeky at most times.
Okay.
Much like Wilbert, were you an enthusiast to steam trains?
Oh my goodness, yes. It's a long, long time ago. I have no memory of it whatsoever. But apparently when I was 3 years old, you still had the last of the Gresley Pacifics, the A4s going into London, Mallard, Sir Nigel Gresley. Apparently I used to demand to be taken to see them. We lived in central London, so my father and mother used to take me to see them when I was perhaps only 2, certainly 3. And apparently I used to draw pictures of them with the streamlined front. I was obsessed with Gresley Pacifics, and how do I know that? Because my mother told me. I have no memory of it whatsoever. I've
And,
only
and some years later, in the TV series, we've got Spencer, who happens to be a streamlined
Well, I did see that. Yes, when the Eurostar came along, I remember talking to one of its designers, and I said it reminds me of an A4 Pacific. He said exactly that sloping front. I have one memory of seeing a steam train in London, and it was the Bournemouth Bell. How do I know? Because the colours of the carriage, and I remember it's going on an embankment through Wimbledon. Lovely engine, but really my earliest memories of trains are of the diesel hydraulics that used to go through Buckinghamshire where I lived as a child. And they were magnificent trains, they really were. Also, the trains were always painted maroon when I was a child. Then they suddenly became blue and white.
Wow. Speaking of that, Spencer's coach, I believe, is a maroon red.
You don't get blue and white coaches anymore, do you? Only on preserved railways. I was actually on a train today coming from Milton Keynes down into Euston, the old LMS, LNWR. And I was thinking back in the 80s or the 70s, when you went on the Mark II carriages in blue and white, you had far more space. They weren't as fast, but they were more comfortable. Today's trains are magnificent, they're soulless, and they're claustrophobic.
Well, yes, and nowadays, yeah.
And very
Especially
expensive.
compared to the earlier days before the end of 1960s, where we used to have steam trains in London and Brighton and where else.
Well, you had steam trains in London as recently as 1967. I know it sounds a long time ago, but I was alive then. And I have a vague memory of when they stopped. But I know that there were steam engines continuing to run on the London Underground, in fact, into about 1970, 71. I mean, I'm in London like you are. I see the posters on the Underground. But really, the very, very last steam train that I saw, I was in the car, my father woke me up to look at it, was somewhere up in Lancashire in 1967.
Yeah, especially the fact that I do have a soft spot for Grizzly engines, streamlined ones. Those are
Oh, they're
like,
wonderful. They,
yeah.
they really were. Even if you don't like trains, you'll always love the Gresley. I was fascinated to find that Gresley himself was a friend of Bugatti, the car designer. He was very, very modernistic, very future-looking. Gresley, an amazing man.
Lovely. Yep, he sure is an imaginative engineer. Yeah. And here's should be the easiest one, coming from Thomas Fan 2611 on Twitter. Did you have a favorite Railway Series book?
Do you know what? It's probably the one with Scarlowe, book number 10. Is it called Four Little Engines?
Ah, that's right. That's right.
There was just something about book number 10. The way the stories all coordinate, they cohere. They really are charming stories. And because I filmed there for Brannan earlier this year and on the Talith Lynn, you could see that Wilbert's passion for the railway really came out in that book. But I think that his storytelling is arguably at its best in that book. Now, maybe others can prove otherwise, but they are really charming stories. You actually feel that the engines are your characters. They're part of the community. It's a lovely book. It really is. I think it's a masterpiece.
Couldn't agree more. Most certainly couldn't agree more. I mean, I felt it is a very charming book. Even I remember while I was at a friend's house, I do remember that they had a Four Little Engines book sometime during the late 90s. I remember that to be a very lovely book. And that's what
Yeah.
Italic in. My most recent visit there was in August when there was the first annual Awdry extravaganza going on at that
That's
time.
right. Well, they exploit their connection. There is one other story I like, and that is the Flying Kipper.
Oh, Henry the Green Engine one. What do you like
Yes,
about Flying Kipper?
I'll tell you why. Because I remember as a child that some freight trains still used to have names like the Biscuit that went to Reading. And the Flying Kipper was obviously named in that tradition. And I remember talking to Wilbert about it. I know that he loved to recreate the actual practice of railways in his books. That's what they're all about. But the Flying Kipper, I think, took it to another level. The fact that the men are sitting in the guards van saying the Kipper's coming, we mustn't hold it up. I think I can't quite remember the exact details, but that book for me really got across the grandeur of the mainline express freight train.
Right. Yes, it's very, very much explaining the railway practices here, especially not holding up the goods train to let the flanker pass.
The express one, yes, the one late at night. It's hard to imagine how trains used to be, a certain kind of train used to be part of people's life. The milk train, the mail train. I've always loved that film, The Night Mail, the engine, the famous carrying the check and the postal order across the border, the 1937 film, I think it was. It's no surprise that the very first promotional films were all about British trains, weren't they?
I see.
On the Southern Railway and the LMS and the mail trains, the goods trains, they had a certain grandeur to them. In this day and age of aggregates, lots of coal, or not coal so much now, but stones going to be dropped out of a truck to build a motorway, they don't have quite the glamour of the flying kipper, do they?
I see. Yeah. So, that I can see that. Let's move into the next question from Crane Engine Studios on Twitter, who asked,
Hello.
what did you like most about the Reverend W. Awdry's stories?
They had a charm. They sucked you into their world, and I could see that the author liked writing them. But what I did like was the way they folded the trains into the community. By a coincidence, a few months after I finished making the Thomas the Tank Engine Man, I made a local film for ITV about this village where this lady had been photographing it from 1924 up until 1994. She'd taken 70 years of photographs. It's a village called Rodbourne in Wiltshire, and the trains, this was the main line train to Badminton Severn Tunnel, the trains ran through. But she said that in the 1950s, 1940s, the goods trains, people used to be picking strawberries off the embankment, and they would wave and talk to the guard on the goods train going through slowly, things like that. Railways used to be part of their community, and that's what Wilbert captured. The total picture, the scenery, the engines, the community, the passengers, the drivers, the relationship between the drivers and the engine. He created his own world, and that's the real talent of an author like Tolkien or P.G. Wodehouse, to create your own world in which everybody plays a part in the novels. I think that was his brilliance as an author. He understood what trains were to the British. And I think in this country, we've got a particular relationship with our trains. Maybe in the United States as well, Casey Jones and things like that. But the railway made modern Britain. And people think of railways as a big city thing, but they were very much a country thing as well. People, even when I was a child, people still used to have affectionate names for the local branch line train. Of course, the branch lines all disappeared very quickly, or most of them, but the train was part of local life, and Wilbert captures that in his novels.
Yeah, it sounds like a very fascinating life story he has as the children's writer and as a movie enthusiast. Right. From Elliot Killick Ward on Facebook. What's inspired you to create the documentary, The Thomas the Tank Engine Man?
Okay. My mother, in 1993, was on a train at Swindon when a guard blew a whistle. And this little boy sitting opposite her with his mother said, "Look, there's the Fat Controller." And everybody laughed. And she came back and told me the story, and we thought, is Wilbert Awdry still alive? This was 1993. We looked him up and found not only was he still alive, he lived about 15 miles from us. So we wrote to him, and my mother wrote an article about Wilbert for the Oldie magazine, which went out later that year. It was she who spotted that, this was late 93, she spotted that in 1995 it would be 50 years since the Railway series first went into print. So that was really the catalyst, the idea that we had an anniversary to celebrate and that there was a great story to tell. And without the anniversary, what happened? Or the boy at the train.
Oh, and that from there is how you met Wilbert Awdry for the first time.
That's right. We met him. My mother met him in 93, excuse me, with the itch. I would have met him the first time in early 1994, and we went to Sodor, which is it's a village called Rodbourne, or Robourne, I think, not far from where we lived, maybe Rodbourne. Rodborough, that's it, yeah. Rodbourne was a village where I made the next documentary, and I told him how much I loved the stories as a child, and we just got on very well.
What was it like to visit his Sodor home in Stroud, where you later filmed his iconic interview and his cluttered study room for your documentary?
When we went there, Wilbert was with his daughter Hilary, who was then still alive, and it was a sort of place where time stood still. You often get this in the houses of elderly people. I mean, he would have been about 82 when we met him, and he wasn't in. He was old. He had osteoporosis, but he was still able to walk at that point. And really, you just got swept up into a different era. It's often the case when you meet old people like that. They take you back to another time. But I looked at the study and I loved it. All the books and the map of Sodor, the kind of the relief map on the wall with the various hills, and the model railway was there. But he did insist on showing us Henry's Forest on his video cassette recorder. And I remember him managing to get the video cassette recorder to play. And he said, I never know how these things work, but my grandchildren tell me how to get it to work. But he managed to get it to work. He showed us Henry's Forest. He was very, very cross about that film.
Well, what responsible driver would stop as if he was in a roadside lay-by? You can't do it. They've shown a lamentable ignorance of Rule 55.
What I particularly like was what interest does the railway locomotive have in scenery? Very good question. I still don't know.
Yeah, this begs a question. While I admittedly liked Henry's voice as a child, in my later years, this did beg the question. I get that you like the forest, Henry, but shouldn't you be, I don't know, working on the main line instead of just laying there in the forest without letting the signalman know?
What really annoyed Wilbert was, and I fully understand this, if you have created a kind of art, whether it's a book, a painting, a film, what you do not want is somebody coming along and changing it. And the essence of his books is that they follow railway practice. And as you rightly say, a locomotive like Henry is not going to be disappearing off down a line in the middle of a forest with trees next to the track.
Yeah.
He was a mainline engine.
Yeah, there could have been, I don't know, a signal box somewhere in the forest.
The point about Rule 55 is very valid.
Yeah,
somebody could go into the back of Henry.
Which reminds me, do you have a favorite moment with a reverend during your time in this home?
Yes, I said to him that I always remembered there was a book with a traction engine, Trevor, and a character called Jem Cole. Yep. And I said, I've discovered this page rereading your book. When I told him about Jem Cole, his face lit up. I said, I've never, ever forgotten that traction engine. That was the happiest moment. I also said to him, we filmed him actually in his bedroom sitting up, because he had had a fall the day before. And he had lots of very, very small books in a bookshelf lining one of the walls. And I looked at one and I said, what language is this in? And he said, it's in Manx, as in the Isle of Man. I said, have you read these books? And he looked at me seriously and said, I have read each one 5 times. I thought, my goodness.
Really?
That's what he said, and I have every reason to believe him. What I do remember is that nothing gave him greater pleasure than to be praised by a man who worked on the railways. I think at heart he wanted to be a railwayman.
Yep. And there must be something to forever cherish and appreciate his works, especially with railway practice.
I mean, he told me how his father used to take him to watch the engines near Romsey in Hampshire as a child, and it takes you back to a strange sort of world that I guess existed up until the 1950s, where the local sort of educated and posh people, if they knew what they were talking about with railways, they were allowed to walk all over them. Nowadays, you can't get near the things. But I mean, train spotting is virtually a criminal offence in modern Britain. But people look at you suspiciously if you're at the end of the platform now. But there was this scholarly interest, and also particularly among clergymen, an interest in railways. And he was part of a very, very English phenomenon, which is this love of railway engineering. It fascinated people of all social backgrounds in Britain. Peter Waterman made that clear to me when we filmed him. But it's funny how reverends particularly like steam engines.
No surprise. I mean,
You think of Eric Tracy, Teddy Boston.
Yep.
I was also fascinated to be told that his grandfather, who lived in a large country house not far from where we lived at the time, it's no longer a family home, in a village called Notton near Melksham in Wiltshire. His grandfather, I think, was the chairman of a railway that ran from Chippenham down to Weymouth. It was absorbed by the Great Western. So his grandfather was actually a controller of sorts himself. Railways ran in the family. I mean, where I was living at the time in Wiltshire, the Awdrys were quite a prominent family around there at one time. I knew a firm of lawyers called Wood and Awdry in Chippenham, and one of the family had been the Member of Parliament for Chippenham in the 1970s and 80s. So the Awdrys, they have roads named after them, that sort of thing. The Awdrys were once quite grand.
Wow, fascinating. Fascinating insight, yes.
And I think that's why his own father would walk all over the railways, so he had a right to do so.
Generation after generation.
Men like that could in those days.
I see, yeah. Now, shall we move to the next questions, which should be focusing on the mostly on the aspects of your production of your documentary. Are we ready for this one, Nicholas?
I am, yes.
All right. The next one will be, how long did it take to make the documentary? From Dominic Rutches on Twitter.
I first started thinking about the idea in the spring of 1994. I proposed it to various TV stations in late spring, early summer 1994. It got the go-ahead, both by BBC and Channel 4, in about July 1994, and we filmed Wilbert in September. We actually finished the English version in January, so it went out in February the 25th, I think, 1995. Mm-hmm. But I had to work on altering the international version, the soundtrack and things, and that wasn't ready until well into March. So I was probably working on it for almost a year.
I never knew you were working on the international dubs of your documentary.
Yeah, it's not hugely different. We just had to get the technical specification of the soundtrack right. It's as simple as that. It took ages. I mean, I was doing other things in between at that point, but I had to promote the film. That was quite good fun, but we did lots of press interviews. What I do remember is originally the budget was £100,000, which was a lot for the time. Be a lot now. And then
thousands.
Oh, yeah, wow. Then BBC Worldwide came in and added £35,000, and the BBC took back £5,000. So the eventual budget was £130,000. Now today, if you adjust for inflation, that's probably £250,000, if not more.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. I've never had so much money on a film.
Wow. In short, how long did it take for your documentary to be made from the beginning to end?
Well, if you think that we were really pushing the idea from about the spring of 94 and it went out in February 95, you're looking at a total timescale of 10 months. But in much of that time, I'm working on other things as well. I would say about 5 months. That's how long it took. So it was quite involved. It took a long time.
I see.
But we did get paid.
That Your Thomas documentary certainly paid off. for your career. I mean, the results really did speak for themselves.
Well, it was shot on film, and we didn't have many people working on it, but you had to work to quite a high standard.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody then talked of standard definition because high definition didn't really exist. What happened was that you shot it on either film or videotape. If you were doing the upmarket version, which was the equivalent of high definition, you shot it on film. Now, film is high definition. It's just that once you transfer it to videotape, it is very, very good quality standard definition.
All right.
Whereas if it starts on videotape, it is average standard definition. Film is always better. It's got much more richness of picture, much more grain.
Anyway, the next question from Jamie Parker on Facebook, who asked, what was the biggest challenge you faced during the documentary?
Gosh, do you really want to know? It was dealing with the Britt Allcroft group.
Oh, Allcroft, oh my God. What was that like?
I'll choose my words carefully. We did not set out to make a film about Thomas, the TV series. We set out to make a documentary about Wilbert. It went in a series called Bookmark, which is about authors. However, we couldn't avoid the TV series, and that increasingly became a major part of the documentary. But they were not easy to deal with. When we turned up at Shepperton, as I've hinted in my Twitter post the other day, we thought we were just the only people filming there. We found we were part of a press day, and I was really annoyed. They tried to make me sign a contract which would give away editorial control. I said, I can't possibly sign that. And I'm not saying it was Brit, but it was the people around her. They were very, very difficult to deal with.
Oh, are you referring to the higher-ups?
Well, Angus Wright and the press, the PR department, yeah, it was... well, I mean, Brit was pretty high up. It was her creation, but
I do get it.
They're a very difficult company to deal with. So I can't put it any other way than that.
Yeah.
And yet you're used to dealing with difficult people in television, but they had a very, how should I put it, proprietorial approach to everything, and they were very suspicious of what we were trying to do. And I was saying that we're trying to make a film about Wilbert Awdry. But they were quite hostile towards him, and that rather annoyed me.
Oh dear, so that must be why Wilbert was not satisfied with the results of the third series and such.
Well, exactly. I mean, they hated the fact that he criticised Henry's Forest. Simple as that. Oh, they said, look, these books were dying before the TV series came along. Wilbert said, no, they weren't. They were doing very well, and I think he was right. They ran a press campaign saying they'd made him £7 million, and we looked for evidence of that and couldn't find any evidence of it whatsoever.
Oh dear, poor old Wilbert.
I'm afraid that film and TV is not a very nice business.
No, not always. Not even Hollywood can be nice.
Hollywood is by far the most unpleasant bit, though I imagine the Indian film industry is probably pretty horrible.
Yeah.
And was dealing with the people working on the TV series. They were very, except for David Mitton, he was absolutely charming. He really was a delight.
Yeah.
And I always felt without David Mitton, it would never have happened. He was the creative mastermind behind it.
Yeah, I can tell that he seems very polite and charming.
Oh, he was a lovely man, but people around him were not. That's one person we did deal with, funnily enough, was Sophie Rhys-Jones, who's now married to Prince Edward. And she was in the Cenotaph the other day, and she was working for this company who were doing the public relations for Thomas the Tank Engine. And I remember speaking to her. She was very courteous, she was. But we tried to get all sorts of people to be on it, like Noel Edmonds and Andrew Lloyd Webber, and they all said no. The only famous person who said yes was Michael Rosen, and he was wonderful. He really was. Oh, and Pete Waterman, but unfortunately the BBC cut him out. But Pete Waterman, he's going to be in one of the bonus features, I can assure you, once we've done the Blu-ray. Yep, the Pete Waterman who owns all the trains. We filmed him. he was in the final cut of the film, then he got pushed out. There would have been room for him if it had been edited more tightly. But he told lovely stories about how growing up in the 1950s as quite a poor boy, nothing used to make him happier at Christmas than to get the latest book in the Railway series.
Wow.
And he said the story, "I can't do it, oh yes you can," inspired him to go on in life. And he became a fireman working on the railways at one point. But by the time we met him, he was a record entrepreneur. And I remember his office had three things around him. He had a load of guns, he had a load of gold discs from selling lots of records, and he had nameplates of locomotives, including off-class 50s, things like that. He was wonderful, really liked him. He and Michael Rosen, they were great fun.
For everyone that had yet to made a donation to the Nicholas Kickstarter project, which will feature a deleted scene with Pete Waterman, then check out his Kickstarter project, which is where the link is in the description below. And then you can either make a pledge to your donation for a copy of a Blu-ray, or use Nicholas's PayPal email to send how much did it cost for a Blu-ray?
It's £25. And that includes all the postage wherever you are in the world.
So there you have it. There's your advertisement for the Pete Waterman bonus feature.
Yeah, I mean, Pete, I had to write him a letter saying, "I'm sorry you're not in it," and I felt so bad about that. I did speak to him later because I told you I made a film about Frank Whittle, the inventor of the jet engine. Frank Whittle came from Coventry, like Pete Waterman, and Frank was one of Peter's heroes. But Peter Waterman, I really liked him. I've met quite a few celebrities, and I thought he was one of the best.
Lovely stuff, yes. That was lovely. Other than Wilbert's home in Stroud, are there any additional filming locations you and your filmmakers went to?
Well, yeah, we went to the West Somerset Railway, Minehead and Blue Anchor. We went to Reed Books, where they had all the artwork. We went to Spalding to film Christopher Awdry doing a book signing. We went to Eric Marriott's house, where we met various people, including Peter Edwards, one of the artists. And we went to King's Cross, as a matter of fact, to film trains. We went to one of the big Oxford Street stores to film all the merchandise. And of course, we went to Japan and did some filming there. We met the people from Sony, and we filmed this Japanese boy telling us about his favourite Gordon Henry characters. We went to Canada thinking we were going to film Shining Time Station, but in the end, they didn't let us. That was a massive setback, a real disappointment. And of course, we went to Shepperton to film series number 4, and I'm told we were filming episode number 100. Yeah, I didn't know it was episode 100. I only learned that 2 days ago.
Yeah, in which in fact it is. And that's Cole Thomas and the Special Letter.
It's. I remember David Mitten saying all the engines are going down to London for something.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story. Going to the big city in London to see the children.
Nice idea. Not quite a Wilbert Awdry idea, but there you are.
It's a pretty much a loose adaptation to one of his stories and from the 8 famous engines, from what I'm seeing, yeah. Right. From Space Train 1984 on YouTube, how was it like visiting Shepperton Studios?
It's pouring with rain that day. That's never putting you in a good mood when you've got film cameras to carry and lights. I didn't quite know what was happening there. It was chaos, basically.
Oh.
We had thought we were the only people filming there, and we were getting a certain, because we were spending lots of money filming. When we got there, we found other news crews, although I don't know whatever happened to their stuff they shot. We were just ignored at one point, and then I had to argue over this impossible contract to sign, which was just sprung on me, and not very nice business practice. But we ended up on set, grabbed David Mitten while nobody was looking, and we got this lovely sequence on the set. Eventually it calmed down. We filmed Brit, and went on for quite a long time. But we also went into the editing room and filmed there. We filmed the engines being tested and stuff like that. What I'll never forget was the kind of thrill I felt the first time I saw the set with the engines in the station. It looked magnificent. I thought what they have done is bring to model life, or life in model form, the England of Reginald Dorby. When I met Reginald's daughter, Kate, she told me her father was a commercial artist who lived in Leicestershire. He used to paint those lovely pictures you see in pubs where you have men in hunting uniforms galloping across the countryside chasing foxes. And she said that for his scenery, what he did, instead of hunting, he just put railway trains in them. He said that the scenery is actually based on the countryside of Leicestershire, south of Leicester, where he lived in Kibworth Beecham. And Sodor is really Leicestershire. And when I see the scenery that David Mitton inspired, I thought, yep, that's pure Dorby territory.
Lovely. I do certainly agree. As word so some fans on social media and such that's growing up with a TV show. I mean, the model sets do look very lovely, and
oh, they're beautiful. They really. I mean, now it just looks slightly ridiculous on television. It's computer generated, but
yeah, now in 2D cuts, in which will
you
be.
see, David Mitton came from an era when children's television was about wonderful models. When I was a child, the best series on TV for a child was Thunderbirds, and David Mitton worked on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Thunderbirds was amazing for
it's fantastic. The Bank of England episode, I love that.
Yeah, so suddenly we're starting to swing away from Thomas to Thunderbirds. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what were your perspectives on how Thomas becoming a global phenomenon outside of his origin country, England?
Well, I was surprised to find how big the whole thing was. It gradually dawned on me that the TV series probably was losing money. I think it did, but it was there to promote the toys, the duvet covers, the slippers, the pajamas, the Thomas pasta, all these things. I realized that it was a very clever, very comprehensive plan in which the TV work drove the merchandise in the way that it did for years on American things. When I was a child, you could get model Thunderbirds. The merchandising was very, very rare when I was a child. I was really impressed at the way it was a very comprehensive and well thought out business plan.
Yeah, I never knew that you were into Thunderbirds. In fact, I did first saw Thunderbirds. I was about as a 9-year-old when they were re-released on video.
It's been re-released all my life, Daniel. It's I did actually work with somebody who directed an episode of Thunderbirds, and there was a lot of ill feeling because people rather felt that they worked for nothing on the early Thunderbirds, but there was a tremendous belief in progress in Thunderbirds. Thomas, the tank engine, what impressed me about the Thomas and Friends series was it took you back to a different world on television, except that commercially it put you very much in today's world, or the 1990s, early 20th century world, of selling merchandise. It really is a very clever operation. I've always had great admiration for what Britt Allcroft and co did.
Anyway, you know that you've mentioned Shunnington Station earlier, which is been the next question from Northern Star on Twitter, who asked, I heard that you were supposed to film a behind the scenes of Shunnington Station segment for your Thomas documentary, but that fell through. Could you tell us more about that? Thank you.
I'd love to be able to tell you what really happened. I remember waiting ages to take a phone call from Britt Allcroft. And I can remember to this day being told by her, you can film on the set in Toronto. And I actually got a new passport, mine had expired, to fly to Canada to do it. But at the last minute we were told, no, you can't film on the set. My colleague went to Canada anyway, and we got the toy shop there and things like that. But you said earlier, what was the hardest part of the production?
Yeah.
It was dealing with the producers of the TV show. Not the director, but the producer. And David was the director. And
I know.
We were rather let down over Shining Time. We really, really wanted to go and film it. In the end, we just had a bit of, we had a copy of one of their tapes. There was a kind of suspicion that we were trying to ride on the back of the TV series, but in fact, we were being paid by the BBC to make a film about the author. And They were suspicious of us from the start. All the people running Brit Allcroft Company.
Oh
It was totally unnecessary for them to be like that.
Yeah, I can see that. It's been the very hardest part.
It was. That's all I'll say. It was exhausting. The production files I've still kept. They are full of faxes and letters backwards and forwards.
I wonder what they'd look like. I want to getting back to pictorial storytelling since.
Well, Tom is going through them at the moment.
Right. Anyway, let's moving on to the next question. This time around Thomas Series 3. From this here, since we know from Wilbert's perspectives that Thomas Series 3 stories lacked any railway practice and instead relied on fantasy, what were your views on the current situation with Thomas and Friends, Big World, Big Adventures, and All Engines Go included?
Well, I wrote an article for the Daily Mail to mark the 65th anniversary. It went out in January 2010. Even then, I was saying the whole thing has lost its way. I really. The trouble is that big American companies have spent so much money buying the rights and the property and the copyrights and the characters. They've got to get a return on it. They've just got to keep on making it more and more global. You know, I'm of the generation that read the Railway series, or had it read to me. And to me, it is Percy, it is Edward, and all that. This idea of I love the idea of a bullied Pacific being in it, albeit not in that colour. But for me, the charm has gone. If I were 3 years old and discovering it, I'm sure I'd see it totally differently. I'm just too invested in the original to really like the modern stuff.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, there are many different people in the Thomas fan base that very much preferring their own. They had their own preferences, and
you love what you grow up with. It's always said that people's favourite pop music is what they listen to when they're 17, no matter what age they happen to be 17 at. So yeah, I fully understand that. I'm not saying there are any absolute truths. It's just that I came into it in the early days, fairly early days, and it was Scarlowe and people like that, and the refreshment lady.
Yeah, I got the point. You're far more into the railway series stuff, like Scarlowe railway stories.
Well, it's funny. When I started making the TV program or researching, I had no idea that there were all these alternative spin-off books. I started looking at them and I was astounded by them. And I began to sympathize with Wilbert. I thought they're taking his concepts and just trying to turn them into any story they can think of. Whereas Wilbert put real loving effort into coming up with plausible stories. And he said, I've run out of ideas. I think he wanted to stop long before 1972, but he carried on.
Oh, wow.
A good artist knows when to stop, like a good athlete.
This next question is we'll follow on from the one that I've asked earlier. This time is submitted to me by Sam Hargreaves on YouTube, who said, Wilbert Awdry and his daughter, Hilary, both criticized the
That's right, yes.
in the documentary. Did Brit Allcroft have anything to say in response?
I'm sure she had plenty to say in private, but she never passed it on to me, I can tell you that. I do remember being a little bit surprised when Hilary said, unfortunately, she's referred to as a businesswoman. I'm sure that she, Brit, saw herself as a producer, and can't take that away from her, she is. But I remember she said, unfortunately, I remember Hilary used the word unfortunately, I think. She's developed her own stories. And I guess they thought, there they go again, the Awdrys complaining. We put their stuff on telly and all they do is moan. I'm sure that's their private view.
Yeah.
But she never said anything to us, no.
Unfortunately, is the most definitive word. That's when the thing's starting to go a little sour with the Awdry families viewing the TV series, as it were before.
Well, I remember Wilbert saying to us, there was a certain coldness between him and Brit by the time we met him, and that was because of Henry's Forest and his criticism of the way they've adapted the stories. And as Wilbert said, they became so big-headed they thought they could write the stories for themselves. They were his words, weren't they?
No, they had still yet to learn a little much about Thomas and Wilbert's characters as much as he himself did.
Well, yes, Wilbert said they keep crane shunting Thomas into situations where he shouldn't be. They overdid it. But that was back in the 90s, early 90s with Series 3.
Yeah.
If Wilbert were alive today, I do not think he'd be particularly pleased to see Thomas doing somersaults.
No. Anyway, on to the next question. What was your favorite part making this documentary? Submitted by Loken the Tankin Dankin on Twitter.
Filming Michael Rosen, filming Wilbert, filming on the West Somerset Railway. I also liked meeting Eric Marriott. But I'm firing off loads of examples now, but I did enjoy the day on the West Somerset Railway. But it's lovely to be able to film a real railway. But it was filming Wilbert, I guess. And but Michael Rosen, I mean, Brian Sibley was wonderful, but Michael Rosen, I really thought was great. I have to say that filming at Shepperton was not my favourite part. I won't deny it. I had tried to find somebody well known who would say how much he liked or she liked the stories, and all we got were authors being rude about Wilbert. I've got the letters from some of them still, and saying no, they wouldn't appear. But Pete Waterman and Michael Rosen, they were quite open. They loved the stories and they said so, and they really brought across the authenticity of how a child learns to love these books and in many cases never forgets them. It's when you find people who really are telling your story for you, that's when you most enjoy making a film. That's when it's fairly easy, actually. But obviously it was a great honour to film Wilbert, and it was good to film his children, but some days were not so pleasant, and I'm afraid filming at Shepperton was the hardest day of the lot.
After your Thomas documentary was made, can you tell us how did you feel after its initial broadcast on BBC Two on February 12, 1995?
I remember I spent the entire day before it went out at the BBC just going through the master tape, the transmission tape, to see if there were any problems. And I was sure that it had been passed for transmission with a picture frame missing. And I anxiously watched the whole thing that night. And then I realised there wasn't a problem. So I went out for dinner with my brother afterwards and thought, well, yeah, it was worth it. It was good. You always have a slight feeling of deflation because you've seen the film many times by then. But when you see the final credits roll with your name on it, it is wonderful, I've got to admit. And you think, good. But you get so involved in making a film, it's only sometime afterwards you appreciate what you've made. At the time you think that could have been better, we could have redone this. But if you're still watching your film decades later and enjoying it, then you've probably done a good job. But I didn't realise that at the time. You finally realise you have achieved something. It's like bringing a child into the world. You've created something. What I love to think is that somebody will still be watching it in 30 years' time and think, I wonder who that guy at the end was who made it. But what is lovely is that this film will get a new lease of life now, and it's I appreciate more than ever Wilbert's abilities as a storyteller. The more I come back to the books now, I see what his talents were. And he was never given, he knew he didn't get the recognition. I told you about Lewis Gilbert, the director, earlier on. He was the most commercially successful British director of his generation, but the critics didn't like him, and he never got the recognition he deserved. And on the one hand, you want the industry to admire you, but there is nothing better than having the public like you. And I know that people like this film.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly the point. Yeah. Anyway, on to the next question about the Awdry family. Do you still get in touch with anyone in the Awdry family at the moment?
Yep. I'm talking to Hilary, sadly is no more, but I met I filmed Veronica earlier this year with Tom and Mark, her son, Mark Chambers. So I'm in touch with that side of the family. Although, unfortunately, I didn't meet them when I met when I did the film in 1994, because Hilary she lived nearer to Wilbert. She was living in Swindon, and Wilbert lived in Stroud in Gloucestershire, not far away. And she was with Wilbert most of the time. And Veronica and her husband lived down in Newton Abbot in Devon, near there, Exeter. And therefore, I met Hilary and her daughter, and also I filmed Christopher at the time, but I'm still in touch with Veronica and her side of the family.
Lovely. Well, I do remember meeting Veronica and Hilary more than twice. Well, mostly.
You met Hilary, did you?
Yes, I did meet Hilary, mostly in London, after the Thomas CGI film premieres. That was around her final years, mostly seeing her bound into a wheelchair shortly before she died in 2013.
About 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I know. That was very sad. I felt very fortunate to have met Hilary, really, as well as having still got in touch with Veronica, whom...
Well, Christopher had some very interesting comments. Sorry to interrupt you. When we filmed him, we only put a small bit of it in the documentary, but he had a lot of good stuff to say. And he said at one point that he thinks his great-grandfather, his father's grandfather, John Awdry, who was the chairman of the Chippenham to Weymouth line, he thinks his great-grandfather actually worked with Brunel.
Wow. I see.
That's quite something, isn't it?
Fascinating. How I was trying to finish this is what I'm trying to say was the last time I've met her was at the South Devon Railway in September, and
Yes, you went there, didn't you? I gather. Veronica told me, yeah.
Around that time, she was wearing a vintage red Thomas sweater, which she told me that her father wore a grey one.
Yes, I gather, yes. I always associate Wilbert with the colour grey.
Now, this will be a very interesting question from Jesse Otis on Twitter, who asked, was there ever at some point in that time when you guys decided to release the documentary on VHS or DVD, or was it going to be exclusive to TV?
It was there was no plan back in those days to put it out on home video, whether VHS, you didn't have DVD then. You just didn't put TV out in those days. It would go out on television, and that was it. It was a great mistake, but it's only now that people want to, I'm giving it out as a reward, but it's only now that we're in the 21st century that there's a market or kind of an eagerness to own these things. In those days, it went out and that was it.
Yeah, so again, for a little small promotion, if you had yet to make a donation to Nicholas's Kickstarter project for your Blu-ray copy, the link is in the description below. Or alternatively, you can send £25 plus postage and package to his PayPal email.
I mean, it's a strange thing, as you know, where people have asked me to make them copies. Over the years, I've made a few dozen, but the BBC, in fact, all the broadcasters, ITV, Channel 4, BBC, the stuff I've done for them had large audiences, but there was never, ever a plan to make it available to the public.
Oh, dear.
I've done far more myself selling my stuff on DVDs or download, mainly on DVDs, to individuals who want to buy or own the story. The broadcasters just don't think in those terms. Walt Disney Studio does, but that's rather different.
Yeah, you can see that. So did Sony Pictures Entertainment and Warner Brothers and Paramount.
Yeah, but they've got a proper commercial approach to these things. That people love to own films, but try telling the BBC that. I know they sell some of their natural history stuff on telly, but on DVD, but BBC has never exploited its library.
Right. Shall we move to the next question, which will definitely be the last one to the subject of the Thomas the Tank Engine Man before we moved on to the final 9 questions.
Okay.
As far as I can understand, everyone felt devastated when the Reverend Awdry passed away at his Sodor home a little over 2 years after your first documentary first aired. How'd you really felt?
My first concern, I was very sad. I was genuinely shocked because it was the night after my film. It was the night my Frank Whittle film went out. But what happened was I got in touch with the BBC and I said, look, can we repeat the film? And they said, yes, of course. And that was really good. I mean, I did my bit by trying to get him remembered again. What I do recall was that after the documentary went out, he appeared in the New Year's Honours List. He was given an OBE, the Order of the British Empire. And I like to think that if we hadn't made the film, or rather as a result of our making the film, that got Wilbert the recognition. I remember Hilary wrote to us and invited us to the memorial service in Gloucester Cathedral. So we were just very, very sad, but I knew he was unwell when we filmed him. He was mentally fine, but I could see that he was he had osteoporosis. He was weakening physically. I just thought he'd go on forever. It's like that when people like that die. They've always been around you, and you don't expect them to die. They have to eventually. We all do. But I was very sad. That's the best way to describe it.
That must have been a very tragic time for those that loved his stories, as well as his family and friends. Around that time he passed away. That's very sad.
What I liked about him, I thought he had an intellectual and a creative honesty to him. Yep. He really believed in what he was doing.
Yeah, I do view, admittedly, viewed Wilbert Awdry as a modest and honest man.
Yes, very much so. He certainly was.
Yeah, he was never grumpy, as a media or the other people make him out to be. Really, no. It's just
what disgusted me was the way the public relations team promoting the TV series. They were quite abusive about Wilbert at one point, which is disgraceful. I said so in my Daily Mail article. But I remember shortly before we filmed Wilbert, I remember him ringing me up in August 1994, and he said he was annoyed it had taken the BBC so long to come and film him. He felt he did not get recognition as an author until the very, very end. And I like to think that the TV series did help, the TV documentary I did help him to get recognition. And I think he probably felt that too. I think the family did.
Yeah.
It was quite disgusting the way people insulted his work, saying it wasn't proper literature. It is. It's very good stuff.
Yeah. I do have a feeling that Mr. Awdry may be watching you from above the heavens, that you were probably doing the modest thing by having a documentary that deserved him some recognition to be re-released on Blu-ray again.
Oh, he'd love it, yes. Mm-hmm.
He'd be much happier for you to do whatever you're doing. Anyways, that's all the questions focused on the Thomas the Tank Engine Man. Now let's focus on the final 9 questions, which will be on the aftermath.
Right.
Can you tell us how Thomas made a huge impact in your life after making your documentary?
Well, it was really an impact while making the documentary, because afterwards I went on to work on other things and I didn't really have much involvement. It's only in the 21st century that fans have started getting in touch with me. There wasn't really an adult fandom back in the 1990s to contact me. I had a few letters from people at the time, adults who'd known Wilbert or liked the books, but it's hard to get this across. But we're talking 26 years ago, 27 years ago, when I was doing the filming. In those days, once you made a film, you just hoped to move on to the next one. You did not get that involved in the story afterwards. I'm more involved in it now than I ever was then.
Right, which reminds me of the next question. That was a fascinating answer.
It may seem a strange answer, but I'm afraid that's the truth.
I know, it is the truth. Which reminds me of the next question. How did you first came across the internet fan base of Thomas and started interacting with adult fans and teenagers as well? Okay.
I think the fan base discovered me. It was probably I remember Mel, he got in touch with me, I think about 11, 12 years ago to talk on a blog, and Ryan Hagan got in touch with me, and then around 2014, 15, others got in touch with me. Actually, I do recall back in 2007, a couple of men in Canada asking me about it. But even in 2010, early 2010, when the article I wrote for the Daily Mail went out, I didn't hear much from fans then. It was really about, I guess, about 10 years ago that the fans started contacting me.
Wow.
But I wasn't aware there was a fandom, I have to admit. Well, at that point, I wasn't.
Which reminds me, the next question was going to be a little interesting during the early 2010s. Are we ready for this one, Nicholas?
Yep, far away.
All right. What was your reaction to some moments in your Thomas documentary that had suddenly becoming internet memes like Rule 55 and You Can't Do It, for example?
Okay. Shall I quote Awdry?
Yep.
I was astonished. I still am.
How so?
Really, when Tom Jetski said to me that fans, when they meet, will quote bits out of the film, such as, "Do you recognise that as your work?" No.
Do you feel that those television programs are still your work?
No.
I thought, my goodness, this is wonderful. I really was flattered to think that my work is admired by all these guys out there, and a few girls out. I really had no idea that people were still talking about it decades later, and that really is the most rewarding part of it all, to have the thing still remembered after so long.
Yeah, and then there was even a YouTube poop of your documentary made by Da Things, from what I saw, and well, I
Really?
Yes, there was one.
Really, it shouldn't be put up on YouTube, but I can't stop it after a while, and I just had to live with it. But I was astonished how many people have watched a version of it in some form or other and still enjoy it. It's wonderful. It really is. Well, an artist always wants recognition. You know that. We're vain people. The worst thing you can have after slaving away, although we got paid well on this one, but after slaving away to make the film, the worst thing is if nothing happens, if people don't go, well, it went, we didn't even know it was there. But there aren't many documentaries from 1995 that people are still talking about, and this is one of them.
Yeah. As far as I can understand that the copyrights can still be a huge issue these days, especially with memes and YouTube poops and such. But then, you see, there is a thing with the internet. There's some people, I'm sure you might disagree there, but here's the thing. Once it stays on the internet, this goes to a YouTube poop thing, it stays forever. But I digress. You see, that just goes to show that there might be something about it that's somewhat promoting fans to actually watch your project. That's your documentary.
Oh, it's funny you should say that. I was astounded to read, this is about 20 years ago, that in Russia, where there's so much copyright dishonesty, apparently when people were legitimately trying to sell the film rights on DVD, the distributors would say, if it has already worked as a pirated copy, then we will sell it legitimately. The reason being, this is most unusual, counterintuitive to say nowadays, if people are already watching it illegally, then they will watch it legally. If they're not watching it illegally, they won't watch it anyway at all. And if people are watching pirate copies or copies that shouldn't be uploaded, that means that they are also prepared to, contribute towards better quality copies. It's hard to explain, but the more people watch something, the more they watch it, the more value it acquires. In a strange way, illegal copying doesn't in fact necessarily devalue a film, although you'd never get a producer to admit that. It's the Russian syndrome that if people will pay for bootleg or illegal copies, then they will certainly pay for legal copies.
Yeah, this is what I was saying in short, without getting carried away and such. If it wasn't for memes and a YouTube poop video that's somewhat still up on YouTube, your documentary may not have had some much recognition as it was back in the 90s, which it is now.
I have a funny feeling you're right there, Daniel, yes. Because it was last shown on British television in 1997. I know it was shown in Australia about 20 odd years ago. But say you're 25 now, you're not going to remember something shown 20 years ago. There is no doubt that YouTube has given a lease of life to stuff which would otherwise have been forgotten.
Yeah, and it's so you never know that there is something about YouTube that's somewhat some bit of ounce of goodness in it as well, positivity.
I just feel sort of ambivalent about it. I mean, I love YouTube as much as the next person. I remember I find it hard to believe that as recently as 2004, when I was making another film about Frank Whittle, the inventor of the jet engine, at that point there were hardly any smartphones. YouTube didn't exist. Facebook was an obscure minority thing. The world has changed so much in about the last 15 to 16 years through broadband
involved. Yeah,
and it means that, I mean, I made a documentary about these celebrities and socialites the year after I completed the Wilbert film, called Daddy's Girls, about these rich girls in London, and people are still buying it off me now. In 1996, this film is now 25 years old. In 1996, it would have been inconceivable that somebody would be buying a film then that was 25 years old, in other words, made in 1971. The internet, in a bizarre sort of way, has both devalued films and yet also created a value for them. And it's very hard to work out which things people will pay for and which things they would love to see, but they're not prepared to pay for. And where it's a special one-off, I mean, if there were 10 documentaries about Wilbert Awdry, I'd have a problem, but there aren't. There's only this one. If you've got exclusivity and a great story, then things like YouTube, in a bizarre sort of way, do help to make people aware of it.
Exactly. That's the point.
Equally, look at all these pop songs from the 70s, 80s that are on YouTube. People upload about 20, 30 different versions of them. You know, they've all made their own recording, and I just find it extraordinary that bands from the 70s might have up to 500 million views of some of their songs. It's extraordinary, but are they making any money out of it? No, but that's because nobody wants to re-release these records. But if you're watching something in large numbers on YouTube, people will also pay for it. Now look at The Lion King. It keeps on getting re-released. People still buy it. You'd think anybody who wanted The Lion King had bought it years ago, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I was in a petrol station in Spain about 3 years ago, and I saw them selling it there for it was the most expensive DVD on sale there. It was a special edition, re-release, double disc, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I thought, this is just unbelievable. Disney just keep on selling it and pushing up the price. Yet the film is old. It's ancient.
Yeah, and they did the thing with a restoration after many years for new generations, you see.
A good film can always be rediscovered. I do believe that.
Yeah.
But most of what you make for television is forgotten the next day.
Since he reconnected with Thomas by collaborating with filmmaker Brandon Carty for his ambitious documentary film, An Unlikely Fandom, can you tell us what it's like working with him and what is the film's subject?
Well, I think Brandon's film is wonderful. It takes such an unusual storyline. The fans. You see, when I was a child, I think you read these books perhaps up to about the age of 6. And when I was doing the documentary, I got the impression they were for younger children than that, maybe aged about 3. Although the children at the West Somerset Railway about 6, 7, 8, that kind of thing. But Brannon has found this whole, well, like you all knew the culture was there, but he's found people willing to talk about it, and he's expanded it from the USA to Britain and to Australia, I gather, and it's a really imaginative idea. I had great fun helping him make it in England and Wales earlier this year.
Lovely. Yes, I do have a feeling it was a very wildly imaginative film.
Oh, I mean, that lovely day we spent filming you, and you showed us the piece of track with the hole in the sleeper, things like that.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah, at my dad's house. It's been a lovely day having you visited there, along with your cameraman who goes by the name of Nicholas.
Yeah, he was another Nick. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, another Nicholas. He was also lovely. And I very much loved the showing the one illustration of Henry comparing to the Reginald Dalby in
the early art.
Yep, the early art. Really Middleton. Still, the interview that I've been filmed for it was one of those highlights of 2021 for me. Outside of per se the Teleclins, Awdry extravaganza and whatnot.
Yeah. No, I could see you enjoyed it. It was a great day, that was.
Yeah. Yeah, out of everything that's this year that mostly has some ups and downs, those were the two things I very much had never forgotten, and I had been able to enjoy, to treasure whatsoever.
I'm looking forward to Brannon's film once it's finished.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to see the results as well. I'm wondering what would it be like once I'm in it and everyone else is in it. Surely we were all lucky to be in it.
There are going to be an awful lot of people in it.
Yep, an awful lot of people, I'm sure. Which reminds me, talking of documentaries, did you know for the most part that your Thomas documentary inspired myself to make my own 12-part fan documentary series titled Steaming to Legacy?
I'm afraid until you told me, I didn't. Equally, I didn't know that it inspired Tom. I didn't know that it inspired other people. It's very flattering to think that you can make a film and other people think, oh, I'd like to do that too, or something similar. I can truly say out of the various excuse me, films, documentaries I've worked on, no other one has inspired anyone to do anything.
Yeah, which reminds me, how do you feel that your documentary inspired filmmakers to tell their own story centering the Reverend Awdry's really useful engines?
I remember when my daughter was about 6, 7, she used to make her own little videos on Windows Media Video. She's now about 22. And she used to make them about Neopets when she was about 8 years old. Remember Neopets?
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. Neopets?
Well, we had this little joke because Neopets had this system of sending Neo mails. And my daughter regards emails as very old-fashioned. So when I send her an email, I say, I've sent you a Neo mail. At Neopets, she used to make her own Neopets and make Windows Movie Maker videos about them. And I think what it is that where children really love a subject, this is not adults, but children, they would love to make their own little films about them. Another thing, she used to play Sims 2. Do you remember that?
Sims 2? I think I've heard of The Sims.
We used to spend ages playing it with the Caliente family and people like that. I'm sure lots of Thomas fans have loved Sims 2. There's also Sims 1, Sims 3, and those tunes it played. But she used to make Sims of Sims. And that whole thing of machinima and simulated film Sims, young people love it. And I think that the whole Awdry Thomas Railway series thing fits into that, because you've got characters like having Neopets or Sims, or in Thomas the Tank Engine or Thomas and Friends, where there are characters. Children and young people love to make their own little films about them. They now do memes and so forth. But I think once Windows Movie Maker came along and similar software programs, Extreme and After Effects, that kind of thing, children just take to it like a duck to water. They love making films.
Yeah. Yeah, that must be a fascinating story.
Well, I can only say this observing my daughter. Had I not had a daughter, I'd be totally unaware of this world.
But still, it was a lovely story. That how it inspired your daughter to make toy stories movies.
She loved Neopets and
Yep.
these websites where girls could design fashion clothes to put on models and things like that. You know, children love interactivity.
Yep, they sure do.
When I was a child, you had Blue Peter and Magpie, and that was it. Oh, and Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds was great because it had action, suspense. Also, Batman, that used to be a great TV series. There was the Munsters, and there was plenty on. There was Top Cat and so forth, but really, it was just sort of now sit up and listen. You just had to sit and watch it. You didn't have any interaction with it when I was a child. You didn't even into the 90s, but in this century, you have done.
Right.
You've got a very audio-visually literate generation.
Fascinating.
Never had it before, because editing used to be, when I first started, a very physical process. You had a great big machine called a Steenbeck with rolls of film, and you had to have the film, you had to cut it, you had to have this great big machinery, you needed a room to put it in, electricity to power it. Once you can do all that on computer as a child of 7, well, the world is your oyster.
Yes, that's a nice phrase to say indeed. I mean, very cool phrase to say, yeah.
This revolution in the means of production has been the biggest change in the industry for me. Really has. It used to be scarcity. Now it's everywhere.
Yep.
Everybody with a mobile telephone is a potential film director. I mean, that probably explains the explosion of pornography in the last 20 years.
Wow. Yeah.
I think it does.
Fascinating. What have you learned from the Reverend Awdry and Thomas the Tank Engine?
Right. I've learned a fair bit about how you write a story for a child. What I have learned is that children's authors still have the ability to think like a child. After I did the documentary, Enid Blyton's daughter contacted me, and she said that her mother was a brilliant child author because she still thought like a child. I've also learned a great deal from observing how Britt Allcroft has taken these lovely stories, come up with David Mitten's help to make a brilliant TV adaptation initially, and make it into a permanent merchandise machine. I've been really impressed by the way the Britt Allcroft organisation has, and all the people, not just Brit, has taken this project around the world. It's an inspiration.
Yep, in spite of their ups and downs, Thomas has impacted many generations of children, having learned from simple stories with fascinating sets of characters with a human emotion.
What I have learned, even this year, rereading them, is the multiple layers in the story. That they are some of them are like you say, 4 little engines. They are really beautiful stories. Wilbert was a great author, and he never got the recognition he should have had. Very hard for children's authors. People are rude about Enid Blyton because her stuff, they say it's childish. Well, of course it is. It's for children.
Right. It sure is a good, fascinating bit of a story there, yes. Even if the authors like Reverend Awdry did not have a recognition as he had hoped, you never know. It's just that there are his characters that he had created that
he died knowing that Thomas, Gordon, Henry and co, Duck, Daisy, Clarabelle, they will live on forever.
Yep, they will live on forever.
Very few authors. Most authors, even if they're big at the time, get forgotten. There are plenty of 19th century authors who were big in the day, but nobody remembers them now.
Yeah, there is a thing called appreciation and cherish in terms of everlasting franchise for general audiences and readers. Yep. Especially in children. Do you have any words of advice for any filmmaker out there?
Yes. 1, keep at it. If you really want to do it, just do it. No matter what happens? You'll regret not trying later in life. 2, find as many stories as possible to tell. And 3, just keep learning more and more about the craft of filmmaking, how to frame a picture, how to structure a story, narrative. Narrative is everything. And 3, how to edit it. And 4, to find out what the public might actually like to watch. Because if you can crack those 4 things, 1, structure, 2, visuals, 3, post-production, and 4, promotion, then you might make a living out of it.
Fascinating words of advice.
Just keep on at it. If you really want to do it, nobody's going to stop you. Like my daughter making her Windows Movie Maker films. She just did it. She just writes novels now on her telephone. And there's something in you, if you're creative, that won't stop. If you have to force yourself to do it, I do sometimes, then perhaps it's not for you. But the people who really want to make films, write music, dance, that sort of thing, play a sport, they just never give up. They just keep driving on. They self-select through their determination.
With a classic way of saying, Nicholas, words to live by.
Yeah, that's the best advice I can give. If you want to do it, just keep practicing.
So there you have it. And thank you for your time to be with us for SmurfyDan interviews as a promotion to your Kickstarter project on remastering footage for the Thomas the Tank Engine Man on Blu-ray.
It's been interesting 2 hours talking to you, Daniel. We're doing well. I'm so grateful to the fandom for their support. I'm rather flattered and touched that they are helping like this. I'll make sure that it's worth their while.
It's worth watching on high definition again. So thank you for your time, Nicholas, and I hope you enjoy your pleasant time whilst you're still promoting your Kickstarter project as well.
Up until now, all I've been able to do is offer people occasionally a VHS copy burned onto disc. It looks okay, but now I've got access to original materials. It will look beautiful.
So before we go, shall we bid our farewells to the viewers, Nicholas?
Well, viewers of Daniel's channel, I wish you all the best. Thank you for support. I'm flattered by your interest in my work, and I know that the Awdry family are delighted that you are out there continuing to support and promote the work of Wilbert.
Yep.
Keep up, as Brandon says, stay unlikely. Keep going.
With that said and done, this is SmurfyDan with producer Nicholas Jones signing off with a jibble toot toot, farewell and goodbye.